Edifice of Trust podcast is a thoughtful discussion of today's current events from the perspective of America's founding principles. Welcome. From heart-pumping music to head-thumping commentary. Recently, I saw an interview of Frank Luntz on CNBC's Squawk Box. Frank Luntz is a pollster, and I'm not very fond of most pollsters, as most of them try to slant the results of their polls to support their previously held positions. Still, polls and surveys are one of the few ways we have to ascertain the opinions and moods of people, especially in the political arena. In business, we generally don't have to use polls to determine if a product or a service is popular. If it is not popular, it won't sell, and the company will go out of business unless it changes its products so that more people will buy them. But in politics, no one truly knows whether a candidate is popular until the day of the election, and then it is too late to make any changes. So politicians use polls to determine if their messages are resounding with voters or if they need to make changes. But as we have seen in election after election, these polls can be wrong, very wrong. Luntz is less of a pollster than a conservative political consultant that advises clients on how to shape their message in order to attract voters. He uses polls and focus groups to determine how people react to words and phrases. Many people have probably seen on TV his tracking polls during presidential debates, where members of focus groups react to what the candidates are saying. He is best known for having shifted the discussion on the environment from global warming to climate change. In his Squawk Box interview, he deplored the politicization of the COVID-19 pandemic, and in a study done with the Bolles Foundation, said, quote, "We don't have a partisan divide, it's a chasm." He went on to say, "Based on our findings, our leaders need to remove politics and partisanship from their messaging and give Americans a better reason to comply other than because it's good for them. They must remind people that it's also good for the other people they love and will speed up the return to a strong economy and a normal life." Luntz's poll for the Bolles Foundation discovered that 62% of Democrats believe the pandemic to be extremely serious, while only 33% of the Republicans felt the same way. Although 74% of all respondents felt that the situation was either extremely or very serious. Further, the poll indicated that most Democrats favored closing things down, while most Republicans said that we need to learn to live with the virus. Not surprising, the study found that Americans trust scientists and public health officials more than any politician, Republican or Democrat. However, most scientists and public health officials are not saying that we should learn to live with the virus or that we need to shut everything down. Those are just political responses to a public health crisis and not a medical response. Reasonable actions such as mask wearing, social distancing, and hand washing can be very helpful in most situations. Closing bars and other crowded venues may be necessary in areas where the disease is spiking. In my county here in Texas, we have 33 new cases per day for every 100,000 population. Bars and gyms are open, but with limited capacity. Masks are required in stores and crowded areas. Counties along the border with Mexico are averaging over 400 new cases per 100,000. Obviously, the situation in these different counties requires different responses. In my county, new cases are climbing, while in El Paso County, cases are declining, although still higher than my county. So the actions that need to be taken may be changing. Not wearing a mask in a crowded venue is not an act of patriotism. It is an act of stupidity and callousness. Such political bravado may have cost the life of former presidential candidate Herman Cain, who attended a Trump rally without wearing a mask and tested positive for COVID-19 9 days later, dying within about a month from the disease. Luntz's study discovered that the choice of the words used to describe the disease and the public health actions to mitigate the disease can affect how people react to the guidelines. He found that 49% of Americans consider the word pandemic more, quote, significant, serious, and scary, unquote, than the words COVID-19 or coronavirus. He recommended that we use words like pandemic more than coronavirus. Use the word protocols instead of orders. Governments should advise people to stay at home rather than order a lockdown, and emphasize public health officials over government officials. Not following proper protocols is a blatant disregard for the health and well-being of your fellow citizens and your older relatives who are especially vulnerable. Here in Texas, 77% of the people contracting the disease are between the ages of 20 and 59. However, almost 60% of the people that are dying from COVID are over 70, although these people only make up about 6% of those getting the disease. The pharmaceutical companies Pfizer and Moderna have now developed vaccines that are 95% effective, far more effective than regular flu shots. And these vaccines are expected to be approved by health officials before the end of the year. Luntz advises that the safety and efficacy of these vaccines should be emphasized instead of bragging about how quickly they were developed in order to reduce vaccine hesitancy. There is light at the end of the pandemic tunnel, but that does not mean that we can relax and stop taking the necessary precautions. It would be criminal to contract the disease unnecessarily because of carelessness due to pandemic fatigue and to die just before the vaccine was available. Ponder that while you listen to a brief message. So, you are stuck at home in self-quarantine. What to do? You could watch television, but all the news talks about is the coronavirus, and there are no sports on TV. You could binge watch a Netflix movie, or you could read a book. Luckily for you, I have just published my new book, In Defense of Principle. It follows the same path of my earlier books, Principled Policy and Edifice of Trust. The book reviews what is happening around the globe and reaches the conclusion that the world is a mess. The book evaluates the existential threats and defense challenges that confront the United States from the perspective of the American founding principles, and develops policy recommendations based on those principles. You can find links to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple Books on my website, www.edificeoftrust.com. Thank you. Welcome back. As significant, serious, and scary the pandemic is, the concept that disturbed me the most in Frank Luntz's study was how easily manipulable people are and how life and death situations can be affected by the changing of a few words. I have written about this before in relation to the behavioral economics of Daniel Kahneman, as described in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, and also in relation to the ideas of Cass Sunstein and Richard Thaler in their book, Nudge. Nobel laureate Thaler and Obama White House economist Sunstein support manipulating people. I wrote about them in my commentary, The Nudger Laureate, published October 9th, 2017. Quote, Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein wrote a very scary book called Nudge. Nudge has a subtitle of Improving Health, Wealth, and Happiness. They think it is not only acceptable, but also laudable to manipulate people into making better decisions. But who defines which decision is better? The manipulators, of course. Thaler and Sunstein think it is not just a good thing, but a great thing that could be applied throughout our society, unquote. The truly scary thing about Luntz's study, even scarier than Thaler and Sunstein's book, was not only how manipulable people are, but how it is almost impossible to not manipulate people. Children learn at an early age how to try and manipulate the behavior of their parents, usually successfully, and we and everybody else is trying to manipulate the behavior of others in order to get something we want. We do it consciously, but also unconsciously, often just by the words we use. The recommendations that Luntz includes in his study and its accompanying cheat sheet describe words and phrasing that appears to have similar, if not identical, meanings, but that can have very different impacts on the people hearing those words. A careless use of words can create a very unintended consequences. In fact, it is almost impossible that a government spokesman not influence the behavior of people. President Trump's choice of words creates one reaction in his base and a quite different reaction in his opponents, perhaps as much as the policies the word describes. And the words being chosen exacerbate the division that the underlying policies have caused. Progressives have known this for a long time. That is why they call the killing of a viable human fetus, quote, a woman's right to choose, and reframed racial preferences into affirmative action. I have always struggled to remember the phrase affirmative action because the words are so bland and neutral that they lose all meaning. All of this is straight out of Saul Alinsky's book, Rules for Radicals. America's founders understood this aspect of human nature. That is why they built in the checks and balances so that the basic functioning of the government would be less vulnerable to manipulation as well. Some of those checks and balances have been weakened over time, and there is a push from the left to further weaken them or eliminate them altogether. But if people are easily manipulable, then we need strong institutions that adhere to our principles to protect us from the vagaries of our own human nature. Thank you.